Okay, if you remember from the last video, we were just starting to look at how these different mouth parts are oriented in space and how they look on actual insects. So remember, we looked at the mandibulate mouth parts, we looked at some piercing and sucking mouth parts, and looked at exactly where the labrum, the labium, the hypopharynx, all that sort of stuff was on these different things. So this lesson, we're going to move on to 3 more types of mouth parts that you're going to see in veterinarily important insects. Okay. Last lecture, we looked at the piercing and sucking mouth parts of the mosquito. Now let's look at a different type of insect that feeds on blood, the horsefly. This fly has a different method of liberating blood from animals. Instead of piercing with needle-like mouth parts, this fly is going to cut into tissue and feed on pooling blood. This type of feeding can cause immediate pain at the bite site, and this is going to leave an open and bleeding wound. This can become infected, and it can attract other insects after this horsefly is done feeding. So let's look at how these mouth parts have changed from those primitive mandibulate mouth parts. But they're also significantly different from the piercing and sucking mouth parts that we saw in the mosquito. Okay, so starting here, again, we've got the same things, the labrum, the maxillary palps, the mandibles, the labial palps, hypopharynx, labium, and maxillae. They're all there. They're just in a slightly different form. The labrum, again, forms a deep gutter, which serves as the food canal. So that's the same as in the mosquito, right? But in this case, it's not nearly as elongate. We don't see it as really long and as thin as in the mosquito. Okay, it's thicker and shorter in the housefly. Now, it's very, very wide because it covers the piercing structures frontally. The labrum also has sensory organs at its apex. This will help the horsefly taste the quality of potential food. Now, the cutting structures are made up of the mandibles and the maxillae. The mandibles are elongated and blade-like, and they're dentate at the tip. So they've got those same teeth-like structures, right, that the maxillae had in the mosquito. So in this case, the mandibles are dentate in the horsefly, while the mosquito had the maxillae dentate in that case for their cutting structures. So these mandibles are paired and they overlap each other, and they will cover that full posterior surface of the food canal. The maxillary palps are very short, and they are just 2-segmented. They sit outside of this whole entire structure. So here they are in this drawing. There and there. Very, very sort of short and stumpy. You can see them up here. So maxillary palps outside, just 2 segments in that case. The hypopharynx will lie between the mandibles and the maxillae. It's flattened and it has a central duct that acts as the salivary duct. So the same way as the mosquito had that salivary duct in its hypopharynx, we see it again here in the horsefly. Finally, the labium, again, forms a sheath that covers the piercing structures posteriorly. Same thing with is in the mosquito, but in this case, it's much shorter. Okay? It's much more robust. It's bigger and fatter, but shorter, simply because the mouth parts are bigger and fatter, but shorter. The ligula in this case, remember what the ligula are? These are those lobes of the labium. So the ligula in this case are very large and well separated. So you can see each lobe here, right? So they will cover all of those structures, overlap everything posteriorly, and surround the distal section of the piercing structures. The distal section is the part further away from the head. So the medial surface of the labium, it is actually heavily sclerotized. It has these channels on it so that as the horsefly pumps out salivary secretions down that salivary gland, or salivary canal, it'll hit that labium. It'll hit those channels and it'll spread out these salivary secretions evenly so it can distribute the saliva. So this is what it looks like for a horsefly to bite you. So you can see these 2 mandibles are there sort of biting in, And as the horsefly pulls back up, it's kind of like a cutting motion. So snipping like scissors. Once the skin is lacerated, saliva is pumped forward to keep the blood from clotting. So it has an anticoagulant in it, just like in mosquitoes. And the fly is able just to sort of sit and suck up that pooling blood through that food canal formed by the labrum. Watch that thing go. Oh, that would be so painful. But this is why it hurts so bad when you have a horsefly bite you. So you can see those sort of two segmented stumpy maxillary palps there on either side. Yeah, it's literally like this insect is snipping into you with scissors. All right, so that was the horsefly. Now on to some even more modified piercing and sucking mouth parts. Fleas have some important piercing and sucking type mouth parts, but they have some significant differences from the mosquitoes or from the horseflies. And these are very, very important when it comes to veterinary entomology or veterinarily important insects. So fleas have a short piercing proboscis, which is about as long as the head. So it's much, much shorter than we see in the mosquitoes, even shorter than we see in the horsefly. It consists of two main components. They're the unpaired and acutely pointed labrum. So remember in the past, or these past couple of mouth parts we've looked at, it's the mandibles that are most acutely pointed. In this case, the labrum is acutely pointed in addition. Okay, so it's acutely pointed labrum, which is also called the epipharynx. Remember what we said about pharynx, fancy word for throat, and if you think about hypo means below, epi means above. So in this case, this is above the throat or above the pharynx. So this epipharynx, it is going to sit above the unpaired the paired maxillae. It's going to sit above this pair of maxillae. The different lobes of the maxillae are elongated and pointed to different degrees. So here is one portion of the maxillae, which are very, very long and sharp. Okay, so you've got one portion right here, the MX. It says down here it's called the stipes. That's one of the lobes of the maxillae. I didn't make you learn. So very, very knife-like in this case. And there's another portion that is sort of blade-like, sort of very long and sharp. And then the maxillary palps are sitting on top. Okay, so sort of pointed here, the lacini or lobe of the maxillae. Here's that blade-like maxillae, and here are the maxillary palps. Okay, so they're pointed in very different ways in this case. The maxillae enclose the labrum laterally and the food canal posteriorly. So they help to form this food canal with the labrum. So they're distally serrated. So again, a little bit different from the horsefly that had the mandibles that were serrated or dentate. So these maxillae are distally serrated. They have these backwards directed teeth, though, that allow for easy cutting into the flesh. The labrum and the maxillae are enclosed by the labial palps. So there's a groove down the median surface of the labrum that serves as an extension of the food canal, and it passes directly into the suction pump of the pharynx. So things look a little bit different going on here, right? So instead of having the labium itself enclose everything, it's the labial palps that have elongated and enclosed everything. Just weird stuff going on here. So you can kind of see the flea mouth parts wiggling around at the top there. When a flea bites, the labium doesn't penetrate into the host. Instead, it serves as a guiding canal or guiding channel for the stylets, which are composed by parts of the maxillae. The stylets find a blood vessel, they tap it, and then they're removed, leaving the labrum in the skin to suck up the blood. Neat. Now, butterflies and moths. Remember that butterflies and moths have siphoning mouth parts. The mouthparts consist of a proboscis. This is made of paired lobes of the maxillae. So just one tiny portion of the maxillae, the galea, as you can see here. They are really, really elongate, and they curve, or they spiral and coil underneath the head of the butterfly or moth while in resting position. So these are firmly connected to each other to form a sucking tube. This acts as both the food and the salivary canal. The labrum is very tiny, so the upper lip very tiny. The mandibles are reduced, and the labium is a small and plate-like sclerite on the ventral side of the head. So pretty much every other portion of the mouthparts are super, super tiny, just hanging out at the top up there. It's just that lobe of the maxillae that are spiral and coiled beneath the head. Now, some moths, in particular the males of some species of owlet moth, can suck blood from humans and animals. They use just some slight adaptations to the siphoning mouthparts. So what they have is this long proboscis, this lobe of the maxillae, will have thorn-like structures along its length and apical teeth. So it's dentate at the apex again to allow for piercing through the skin. I'll show you a video of that later when we start talking about the Lepidoptera in a couple of weeks. Now, to feed, the proboscis is uncoiled from underneath the butterfly or the moth's head, and it moves around, just acts like a straw. Okay, so it will then dip into flowers like you see here and suck up the nectar. All right. So that is an in-depth look at all these different types of mouthparts. There's many more out there, but these are the ones primarily that we're going to see on veterinarily important insects. A lot of piercing and sucking, a lot of cutting type of mouthparts. Up next, we're going to move on to the rest of the external anatomy. So we'll start with thorax, and we will finish up this week with the external abdomen. Let me know if you have any questions.